The Iran maximum security facility floated in the void between three dead stars, its crystalline walls designed to contain the galaxy's most dangerous criminals. For 800 cycles, no prisoner had ever escaped. The warden, supreme overseer, took pride in this record. His 6 eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he reviewed the morning reports from his command center. "Another peaceful night," chirped his assistant, a nervous whose feathers constantly shifted colors with anxiety. "All prisoners accounted for, all security systems functioning at optimal capacity." Mandibles clicked approvingly. The facility housed over 10,000 inmates from 47 different species, each cell custom-designed to neutralize the specific biological advantages of its occupant. Aquatic found themselves in dry chambers with precisely controlled humidity. The rock-eating granites were given only synthetic minerals that their digestive systems couldn't process. Flying species had their wings clipped and were kept in low-gravity fields that made aerial movement impossible. But it was the human in cell block Omega that fascinated the most. Had arrived 3 months ago, convicted of destroying a Galactic Council supply depot and killing 47 peacekeepers. The crime itself wasn't unusual. Rebellions happened across the galaxy regularly. What made interesting was his complete lack of enhanced biology. No natural armor, no venom, no telepathic abilities, no adaptive camouflage. He was disturbingly average by galactic standards. Humans, mused to himself, the most unremarkable species in the galaxy. Earth had only joined the Galactic Council 15 years ago, and humans remained something of a curiosity. They had no single dominant trait that made them exceptional. They weren't the strongest, fastest, or most technologically advanced. They seemed to excel at being perfectly mediocre in every measurable category. Which made crimes all the more puzzling. How had such an ordinary being managed to outmaneuver an entire peacekeeping battalion? Pulled up's file on his holographic display. The human sat quietly in his cell, apparently reading from a data pad. He'd requested access to the prison's educational database, claiming he wanted to study galactic history and xenobiology. Most prisoners either raged against their confinement or sank into depression, seemed genuinely interested in learning about his fellow inmates. "Curious creature," the warden muttered. Cell was designed specifically for humans. The gravity was set to Earth normal, the atmosphere was a nitrogen-oxygen mix, and the temperature remained at a comfortable 22 degrees Celsius. There were no obvious weapons, no tools, no technology beyond the basic life support systems. The walls were made of reinforced composite, strong enough to withstand the physical strength of a berserker. The prisoner's schedule showed that it made requests to visit the communal areas. Most humans preferred isolation, but actively sought interaction with other species. He'd been observed having lengthy conversations with a philosopher, learning meditation techniques from a monk, and even playing strategy games with a captured Nexus hive mind fragment. "Sir," the assistant interrupted his thoughts, "the daily inspection team is requesting permission to enter cell block Omega." Waved a claw dismissively. "Proceed, but maintain full surveillance on the human. I want to know if he so much as scratches himself differently than yesterday." The inspection team consisted of 6 guards from different species, each chosen for their unique sensory abilities. Al could see across 17 different light spectrums. Could detect chemical traces at the molecular level. Han possessed echolocation so precise she could map a room's contents through solid walls. Together, they formed an investigative unit that could detect virtually any form of concealment or contraband. As they moved through cell block Omega, the team found everything exactly as expected. The cells were clean, the prisoners accounted for, and all security measures functioning normally. When they reached cell, the human looked up from his reading and offered a polite nod. "Good morning," said in perfectly pronounced galactic standard. "How are you all doing today?" The guards exchanged glances. Most prisoners either ignored the inspection teams or hurled insults and threats. Friendly conversation was unusual enough to be suspicious. Al scanned the cell with his enhanced vision, checking every surface across multiple spectrums. Nothing appeared out of place. Tested the air for unusual chemical signatures while Han used her echolocation to map the cell's interior structure. All readings came back normal. "This human troubles me," Al reported to his team through their private communication link. "He shows no signs of stress, no biochemical markers of planning or aggression. He's either genuinely content or he's managed to achieve a level of mental control that should be impossible for his species. Continued reading as the guards completed their inspection. The data pad showed he was studying the social structures of hive mind species, cross-referencing behavioral patterns between nexus fragments and collectives. Academic material, nothing that seemed remotely useful for escape planning. After the team departed, reviewed their findings. Everything appeared normal, yet something nagged at his consciousness. In his experience, the most dangerous prisoners were often those who seemed the most harmless. He decided to review his interactions with other prisoners. The surveillance recordings showed the human engaging in what appeared to be casual conversations, but noticed patterns that made him uncomfortable. Asked questions about guard rotations, but framed them as curiosity about prison operations. He inquired about the facility's history, particularly focusing on previous escape attempts and how they'd been thwarted. Most concerning was his apparent ability to remember everything. The human never took notes, yet he could recall specific details from conversations that had occurred weeks earlier. When talking with a quantum technician imprisoned for data theft, demonstrated understanding of concepts that should have been far beyond human educational levels. "Pull up the communication logs," ordered his assistant. "I want to see every conversation has had since his arrival." As the data streams flowed across his display, began to see a disturbing pattern. Wasn't just making friends with his fellow prisoners, he was systematically gathering information. From the philosopher, he'd learned about meditation techniques that could slow metabolism and reduce oxygen consumption. The monk had taught him breathing exercises that allowed conscious control over heart rate and body temperature. The Nexus fragment had shared insights into collective thinking and resource optimization. Each piece of knowledge seemed innocuous by itself, but together they painted a picture that made chitinous spine crawl. "Increase security around cell block Omega," he ordered. "Add 2 additional guard rotations and install quantum flux detectors in every cell. If this human is planning something, I want to know about it before he takes his next breath." Meanwhile, in his cell, continued reading about galactic prison systems. To any observer, he appeared to be a model prisoner, quiet, studious, and completely resigned to his fate. But behind his calm exterior, a complex plan was taking shape. The warden was right to be suspicious. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest species in the galaxy, but they had developed one trait that made them uniquely dangerous: the ability to see patterns and possibilities that others missed. Had been mapping the facility's routines since his first day. He knew exactly when each guard rotation began, how long the automated systems took to cycle through their security checks, and which prisoners had skills that might prove useful in the right circumstances. More importantly, he understood something that his captors didn't. The Iran facility had been designed to contain individuals, not to prevent coordinated group action. Every security measure focused on stopping single prisoners from exploiting their natural abilities. But humans had built their civilization on cooperation, and had spent 3 months turning a collection of alien criminals into something resembling a team. As evening approached and the facility's lights dimmed to simulate natural day cycles, closed his data pad and lay back on his sleeping platform. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to learn, to plan, and to prepare. The warden believed escape was impossible, and by conventional standards, he was probably right. But had never been particularly conventional. He smiled slightly as he drifted toward sleep, already visualizing the next phase of his plan. The guards thought they were watching a resigned prisoner passing time with harmless study. They had no idea they were observing the final preparations for the most ambitious escape attempt in galactic history. The morning alarm resonated through the Oran facility at precisely 800 Galactic Standard Time, its harmonic frequencies calibrated to wake every species without causing discomfort. Was already awake, having trained his circadian rhythm to match the facility's schedule during his first week of imprisonment. Today marked exactly 100 days since his arrival, and had prepared something special to commemorate the occasion. As the automated food dispensers activated throughout the prison, made his way to the communal dining area. The space buzzed with the usual morning activity, thousands of beings from dozens of species consuming their species-appropriate nutrition while maintaining the careful social hierarchies that prevented conflicts. Carried his tray to a table occupied by what the guards had dubbed the philosophy circle. The group consisted of Ra, a convicted of thought crimes against her government, a monk imprisoned for refusing to reveal the location of sacred texts, and Fragment 7, a piece of Nexus consciousness that had been separated from its collective for attempting to liberate slave worlds. "Good morning, friends," said, settling into his seat. The casual greeting had become routine over the past months, but today carried additional weight that only he understood. Ra's crystalline features sparkled as she acknowledged him. "Your biorhythms seem elevated today. Are you experiencing excitement about something?" Smiled, the empathic abilities made her an excellent barometer for emotional states, but he'd learned to project surface feelings that masked deeper intentions. "I've been thinking about our discussion yesterday, the one about theoretical problem-solving across species boundaries." Fragment 7's mechanical voice buzzed with interest. "Specify, which theoretical problems do you wish to explore?" "Well," began, cutting into his protein allocation, "I was wondering about the mathematical principles behind coordinated action. You know, how different types of intelligence might work together to solve impossible problems." The table fell silent as words registered. To any listening guards, the conversation would sound like abstract philosophical debate, but each of his companions understood the deeper meaning behind seemingly innocent questions. Ra's empathic senses picked up carefully controlled excitement from some emotional aura, recognized the meditative breathing pattern had adopted, one designed to maintain clarity under stress. Fragment 7's analytical subroutines detected statistical patterns in word choices that suggested today was significant. "Theoretical coordination requires understanding each participant's unique capabilities," Ra replied carefully. "A might contribute emotional insight and energy manipulation. A could provide spiritual focus and metabolic control." Fragment 7 added, "Collective processing suggests optimal resource allocation through specialized skill distribution. Each unit contributes maximum efficiency within operational parameters." His deep voice rumbled across the table. "Ancient texts speak of moments when different paths converge into singular purpose. When such convergence occurs, previously impossible achievements become inevitable." Nodded thoughtfully. "That's fascinating. And I suppose such coordination would be most effective if each participant understood their role completely, without needing constant communication." The conversation continued for 37 minutes, covering topics ranging from theoretical physics to philosophical ethics. To the surveillance systems, it appeared to be another morning's worth of academic discussion between educated prisoners. The guards monitoring the audio feeds noted nothing suspicious. They missed the significance entirely. When breakfast concluded, followed his established routine. He visited the prison library, spent 2 hours in the exercise facility, and attended the afternoon educational session on galactic history. Every action appeared perfectly normal, but careful observers might have noticed subtle changes. In the library, research focused on facility maintenance schedules and the biographical histories of key administrative personnel. During exercise, he practiced breathing techniques that could slow his heart rate to near-death levels. The educational session found him asking detailed questions about emergency protocols and evacuation procedures. By evening, word had spread through carefully selected channels. Theoretical discussion had been decoded by recipients throughout the prison population. 17 different species now understood that tomorrow night would bring opportunity. Each group had been given specific instructions disguised as casual conversation over the previous months. Warden noticed none of this. His attention focused on more obvious security concerns. A group of berserkers had been agitating for better food quality. Several had requested modifications to their environmental controls. The quantum technician had submitted multiple appeals for computer access to continue his research. Normal prison problems with normal solutions. His experience told him that these visible complaints usually mask the real threats, but his investigation teams found nothing suspicious in Block. The human remained a model prisoner, quiet, studious, and apparently resigned to permanent incarceration. The warden's mistake was assuming that human planning followed patterns established by other species. Planned through dominance displays, coordinated through emotional synchronization. Nexus fragments relied on shared consciousness. Each approach had recognizable signatures that security systems could detect and counter. Human planning, however, relied on something much more subtle: the ability to communicate complex ideas through seemingly unrelated information. Had spent months teaching selected prisoners how to think like humans, sharing techniques for indirect coordination that bypassed every security protocol. As night fell across the facility, lay on his sleeping platform and reviewed the plan one final time. Tomorrow's escape would require precise timing, flawless coordination, and the kind of creative problem-solving that humans had perfected over of cooperative survival. Phase 1 would begin during the morning meal, when Ra would use her empathic abilities to synchronize emotional states among key participants. Phase 2 would occur during the afternoon shift change, when Fragment 7 would overload the facility's central processing systems with recursive logic puzzles. Phase 3 involved metabolic control techniques, allowing selected prisoners to simulate medical emergencies. But the real genius of his plan lay in its foundation. He'd convinced dozens of prisoners from different species to work together not through coercion or bribery, but by teaching them to see possibilities they'd never imagined. Each participant understood their specific role and timing. More importantly, each had been taught to adapt if circumstances changed. The plan wasn't rigid like most escape attempts. It was flexible, organic, and capable of evolution in real time. Smiled as he drifted toward sleep. Believed his facility was impregnable because it had been designed by the galaxy's finest security experts. Those experts had accounted for every individual threat and created countermeasures for every known escape methodology. But they'd never encountered a human who understood that the greatest strength of his species wasn't physical prowess or technological superiority. It was the ability to transform groups of individuals into something greater than the sum of their parts. Tomorrow, the Iran facility would learn why humans had spread across the galaxy despite lacking any obvious evolutionary advantages. They would discover what happened when human ingenuity was combined with alien capabilities and focused on a single objective. The morning of day 101 began like any other at the Iran facility. Automated systems hummed to life, recycling air and adjusting environmental controls for optimal prisoner health. Guard rotations proceeded on schedule, with fresh personnel taking positions throughout the complex's 17 levels. Warden arrived at his command center carrying a cup of steaming stimulant tea, his 6 eyes already scanning the overnight reports. Everything appeared normal. Prisoner count remained stable, all security systems showed green status indicators, and the previous night's patrols had found no violations or contraband. "Sir," his assistant announced, "the human in cell block Omega has requested access to the advanced physics database. He wants to research theoretical applications of quantum field manipulation." Paused mid-sip, curious what's his stated purpose. "Academic interest, sir. He's been corresponding with Fragment 7 about collective consciousness theory and wants to understand the mathematical foundations." The warden's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. His research requests had grown increasingly sophisticated over recent weeks, but they remained within acceptable parameters for a prisoner with full library access. Still, something felt different about today's request. "Grant the access," decided, "but log every query he makes. I want to know exactly which information he's accessing." 3 levels below, received notification that his research request had been approved. He smiled slightly as he activated his cell's display terminal and began accessing quantum field equations. To any monitoring system, he appeared to be conducting genuine academic research. In reality, he was reviewing the final technical specifications needed for today's operation. At precisely 8:47 hours, made his way to the communal dining area. His emotional state registered as calm curiosity to the facility's biometric scanners, exactly what they expected from a model prisoner beginning another routine day. The dining hall contained its usual population of nearly 3,000 beings. Species segregation wasn't enforced, but natural behavioral patterns meant that most groups clustered according to biological compatibility. Aquatic species occupied tables near the humidity controls. Silicon-based gathered around the mineral dispensers. Energy beings maintained appropriate distances from electromagnetic-sensitive prisoners. Navigated through this complex social ecosystem with practiced ease, greeting acquaintances, and making small talk that seemed perfectly innocent. But to those who understood his true purpose, Every interaction carried specific meaning. He paused at a table of merchants, convicted of running prohibited substances across sector boundaries. "Good morning, On. How are the mathematics exercises coming along?" The lead's translator rendered his response as mild enthusiasm. "Quite well. We've been practicing those coordination problems you suggested. Very enlightening approaches to resource optimization." Nodded approvingly. "Excellent. Remember, timing is crucial for optimal results. The theoretical window we discussed occurs at exactly 1347 hours." To anyone listening, the conversation sounded like academic mentorship between prisoners. The guards monitoring the audio feeds noted nothing suspicious. They failed to recognize that it just confirmed the precise moment when a coordinated smuggling operation would activate every contraband communication device that had hidden throughout the facility. Similar conversations occurred at 17 different tables over the next 23 minutes. Each appeared to be casual social interaction between prisoners who developed academic friendships during their incarceration. Each actually served to confirm timing, responsibilities, and contingency procedures for the largest coordinated escape attempt in galactic history. At 9:23 hours, settled at his usual table with the philosophy circle, Ra's crystalline features immediately registered the subtle changes in his biorhythm patterns. Fragment 7's sensors detected elevated electrical activity in its neural patterns. Spiritual awareness perceived the focused determination radiating from the human's carefully controlled aura. "Today feels different," Ra observed, her empathic abilities picking up emotional resonance from prisoners throughout the dining hall. "There's an undercurrent of anticipation that wasn't present yesterday." Cut into his protein allocation with steady hands. "Sometimes anticipation is just excitement about learning new things. Speaking of which, have you given more thought to our discussion about energy redistribution?" The eyes sparkled with understanding. "Yes, I've been practicing the techniques you described. The ability to channel emotional energy across multiple targets simultaneously, quite fascinating from a theoretical perspective." Fragment 7's mechanical voice buzzed softly. "Collective processing algorithms indicate optimal synchronization occurs when individual units operate within predetermined parameters while maintaining adaptive flexibility for unexpected variables." His deep voice added, "Ancient meditation texts describe moments when spiritual energy achieves perfect flow. Such moments allow consciousness to transcend apparent limitations and accomplish seemingly impossible tasks." Nodded thoughtfully as he continued eating. To monitoring systems, the conversation appeared to be another session of abstract philosophical discussion. In reality, he just received confirmation that his three most crucial allies were ready to execute their assigned roles. As breakfast concluded and prisoners began dispersing to their assigned activities, followed his established routine. He visited the library, accessed his approved research materials, and spent 90 minutes reading quantum physics texts that would provide the theoretical foundation for what was about to occur. The afternoon shift change at 1347 hours would mark the beginning of the most complex escape operation ever attempted. But the real genius of his plan lay in its invisibility. Every action would appear to be normal prisoner behavior until the exact moment when individual elements combined into unstoppable momentum. Understood something that the facility's designers had missed. They'd created security systems capable of detecting and preventing every known type of escape attempt. But they'd never encountered a human who could teach alien prisoners to think like humans, to see connections and possibilities that their own species had never imagined. At 1200 hours, attended the mandatory educational session on galactic law and prisoner rehabilitation. He sat quietly in the back row, apparently paying attention to the instructor's lecture about reform through constructive activity. None of the guards noticed that his breathing had shifted into the deep, controlled pattern that had taught him, a technique for maintaining perfect calm under extreme stress. Time moved forward with mechanical precision. 12:15 hours, 12:30 hours, 12:45 hours. Throughout the facility, dozens of prisoners went about their daily routines while internally preparing for actions that would be remembered across the galaxy. At 13:30 hours, returned to his cell for the mandatory rest period before afternoon activities. He lay on his sleeping platform and closed his eyes, but his mind remained completely alert. In 17 minutes, the most carefully orchestrated prison break in galactic history would begin. The warden's perfect security record was about to end, and it would happen through methods that no security expert had ever imagined. Because humans had taught the galaxy's most dangerous criminals something truly revolutionary: how to work together not just as individuals seeking personal freedom, but as a coordinated team pursuing a common goal. Smiled as the final countdown began. The next few hours would demonstrate why humans had become one of the galaxy's most successful species despite lacking any obvious natural advantages. They would prove that the most dangerous weapon in the universe wasn't superior strength or advanced technology. At exactly 13:47 hours Galactic Standard Time, the afternoon shift change began at Iran facility. Guard Captain led the outgoing security team through their standard handover procedures, reviewing incident reports and prisoner status updates with his replacement. The process had been refined over 800 cycles of operation and proceeded with clockwork precision. Neither captain noticed that 17 merchants had positioned themselves near strategic communication nodes throughout the facility. Lay motionless on his sleeping platform, his breathing so controlled that the biometric monitors registered him as being in deep sleep. In reality, every nerve in his body was alive with anticipation as he listened to the facility's ambient sounds and waited for the first signal. It came at 13:49 hours and 37 seconds. A barely audible harmonic tone resonated through the ventilation system, so subtle that it seemed like nothing more than the normal settling of metal structures under atmospheric pressure. But to the trained ears of coordinated prisoners throughout the facility, it carried a very specific message. Phase 1 had begun. They activated their contraband transmitters simultaneously. 17 micro-devices, each no larger than a grain of sand, and constructed from materials that bypassed every security scanner, began broadcasting coordinated interference patterns across the facility's communication networks. In the Security Command Center, Warden frowned as his communication displays began showing minor static. The disruption was barely noticeable, just enough to delay data transmission by a few milliseconds and introduce occasional gaps in audio feeds. His technical staff dismissed it as routine electromagnetic fluctuations from the nearby stellar radiation. They had no idea that those few milliseconds of delay would prove crucial to what came next. Phase 2 activated at 13:52 hours when Ra began her empathic coordination sequence. This natural abilities allowed her to sense emotional states across vast distances, but had taught her something new: how to project emotional synchronization patterns that could influence behavior without triggering conscious awareness. Throughout Cell Block Omega, prisoners began experiencing subtle mood shifts, nothing dramatic enough to alert the guards, but sufficient to create a sense of unified purpose that transcended species barriers. A berserker found himself feeling unusually calm and focused. A nervous discovered unexpected confidence building in his chest cavity. Even the cold logic processors of mechanical beings registered optimization patterns they couldn't quite explain. Felt the wave of synchronized emotion wash over his section of the facility and smiled. Ra's technique was working perfectly. Dozens of beings who'd spent months learning to think like humans were now emotionally synchronized and ready for coordinated action. At 13:54 hours, Fragment 7 initiated Phase 3. The Nexus consciousness fragment had been isolated from its collective for 3 years, but it still retained the ability to process information at superhuman speeds. Had spent weeks teaching it a technique that no Nexus had ever attempted: how to think like an individual while maintaining collective-level processing power. Fragment 7 began accessing the facility's central computer system through its assigned educational terminals. But instead of normal research queries, it launched a series of recursive logic puzzles that seemed like legitimate academic exercises while actually consuming enormous amounts of processing power. The facility's AI systems detected the increased computational load, but classified it as normal educational activity. They failed to recognize that Fragment 7 was systematically overloading their threat analysis subroutines by presenting paradoxes that required exponential processing time to resolve. Security response times began degrading incrementally. Surveillance analysis slowed by microseconds. Automated threat detection systems started experiencing minor delays as they struggled to process Fragment 7's impossible mathematical constructs. Rose from his sleeping platform at 13:56 hours, his movements casual and unhurried. To the automated monitoring systems, he appeared to be a prisoner waking from afternoon rest and preparing for evening activities. The biometric scanners detected normal heart rate, standard respiratory patterns, and baseline stress indicators. They missed the fact that his breathing had shifted into the advanced metabolic control pattern that had taught him. His heart rate remained normal, but his cardiovascular efficiency had increased by 40%. His oxygen consumption had dropped to levels that would allow him to function in near-vacuum conditions. His muscle coordination had achieved the kind of precise control that meditation masters require decades to develop. Phase 4 began at 13:58 hours when carefully selected prisoners throughout the facility started experiencing medical emergencies. The symptoms were perfectly authentic: elevated heart rates, respiratory distress, apparent loss of consciousness. But they occurred in a coordinated pattern that stretched the medical response teams beyond their capacity. Had taught 37 prisoners across different species how to use meditation techniques to simulate life-threatening conditions. Each emergency was timed to occur in locations that would draw guards away from critical security positions while creating enough genuine medical symptoms to require immediate attention. Doctor, the facility's chief medical officer, found herself responding to more simultaneous emergencies than she'd seen in her entire career. Prisoners from 6 different species were experiencing what appeared to be species-specific medical crises requiring immediate intervention. The medical team's response protocols automatically triggered security redeployments as guards escorted emergency personnel to crisis locations. Within minutes, guard coverage in non-critical areas had been reduced by 60%. Warden watched the chaos unfold from his command center with growing unease. Multiple medical emergencies weren't unprecedented, but the timing felt wrong. His security experience told him that coincidences of this magnitude usually indicated coordinated action. Run a facility-wide threat assessment, he ordered his assistant. Cross-reference all emergency locations with prisoner associations and communication patterns from the past week. The analysis should have taken 30 seconds, but Fragment 7's logic bombs had degraded the central computer's performance just enough to slow the process. The system began the threat assessment but got caught in recursive loops trying to resolve impossible mathematical paradoxes. Processing time stretched from seconds to minutes. At 13:59 hours, stepped out of his cell and walked toward the communal area. His movements triggered automatic security protocols, but the monitoring systems were experiencing the microscopic delays introduced by interference. Response time lagged by crucial milliseconds. As he moved through the corridor, past 17 other prisoners from his block, each had legitimate reasons for their movement: scheduled activities, approved transfers, medical appointments. None appeared to be coordinating with the others, but had spent months teaching them human techniques for indirect communication. A subtle gesture meant proceed to secondary position. A specific breathing pattern indicated maintain cover. Eye contact held for precisely 2 seconds conveyed execute contingency plan 7. By 1400 hours, 93 prisoners from different species had positioned themselves throughout the facility according to a coordination plan so complex that no single individual understood more than their specific role. Each participant knew their timing, their objectives, and their emergency procedures. But the overall design remained comprehensible only to the human who'd spent 3 months turning alien criminals into something resembling a special operations unit. Warden's threat assessment finally completed at 14:01 hours. The results made his chitinous spine crawl. The analysis detected coordination patterns among prisoners who should have had no significant contact. Communication pathways that followed indirect routes between beings who'd never been observed working together. Resource movements that suggested preparation for unknown activities. Lock down the facility, he ordered immediately. Full security protocol, no prisoner movement without direct authorization. But he was 67 seconds too late. Phase 5 had already begun. At 1400 hours and 33 seconds, had stepped into the facility's central transportation hub. The massive chamber connected all 17 levels through a network of lifts and transport tubes designed to move large numbers of prisoners efficiently while maintaining security. Had studied the hub's design for months. He understood its traffic patterns, its security protocols, and most importantly, its single point of failure. Every transport system in the facility relied on a central coordination node that managed traffic flow to prevent collisions and unauthorized movement. As the lockdown order propagated through the facility's communication network, reached the transport hub's control terminal. The device should have been impossible for a prisoner to access. It required administrative codes, biometric authorization, and security clearances that no inmate possessed. But didn't need to break into the system. He'd spent 3 months teaching other prisoners to think like humans, and humans had always excelled at finding solutions that required cooperation rather than individual ability. Fragment 7 had been gradually introducing subtle modifications to the transportation system's software over the past month. The changes appeared to be routine maintenance updates and optimization patches. In reality, they'd been preparing the system to accept a very specific type of unauthorized command sequence. Ra's empathic projections had been conditioning the central control AI to associate certain emotional patterns with legitimate authority. The artificial intelligence had learned to recognize cooperative decision-making as a positive indicator, making it more receptive to commands that demonstrated coordinated thinking. The communication interference had introduced precisely timed delays into the security verification processes. Authorization checks that should have taken microseconds were now requiring several seconds to complete. And meditation techniques had trained selected prisoners to maintain perfect emotional and physical control under extreme stress. They could now interact with security systems while projecting the exact biorhythmic patterns that indicated calm cooperation rather than criminal intent. Placed his hand on the control terminal's biometric scanner. The system should have immediately rejected his access attempt and triggered multiple alarms. Instead, it hesitated for 3.7 seconds while struggling to process Fragment 7's logic bombs, Ra's empathic conditioning, and the interference patterns disrupting its verification protocols. During those crucial seconds, entered the command sequence he'd been memorizing for weeks. Not a sequence designed to break security, but one designed to convince the transportation system that a facility-wide prisoner evacuation drill had been authorized by the warden's office. The system's confused AI, struggling with multiple forms of subtle manipulation, decided to accept the command rather than risk delaying a legitimate emergency procedure. Throughout the Oran facility, transport tubes began activating in a coordinated sequence. Lifts started moving toward predetermined positions. Emergency evacuation protocols engaged across all 17 levels. And 93 prisoners from 47 different species began moving toward freedom through escape routes that existed only because a human had taught them to work together like humans. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had spread across the stars despite being the transport system's emergency evacuation protocols engaged with mechanical precision, activating sequences that hadn't been used since the facility's original construction. Lifts moved toward prisoner blocks, while transport tubes prepared to channel the population toward designated safe zones. To the system's confused artificial intelligence, this appeared to be a legitimate drill authorized by proper authority. Warden watched his command displays with growing horror as every security protocol he'd spent decades perfecting crumbled in real time. The facility-wide lockdown he'd ordered was being systematically by evacuation procedures that superseded normal security restrictions. "Sir," his assistant called out, feathers shifting through rapid color changes. "The transport system is showing massive activation across all levels. It's implementing emergency protocols we haven't used in 300 cycles." 6 eyes focused on the main display as red warning indicators cascaded across the facility map. Prisoner movement was occurring on an unprecedented scale, but the system registered it all as authorized evacuation activity. His security forces were receiving contradictory orders as automated protocols clashed with manual commands. "Override everything," he snarled, his mandibles clicking with rage. "Manual control only, cut power to all transport systems immediately." But Fragment 7 had anticipated this response. The Nexus consciousness had spent weeks learning human approaches to redundant planning. As the facility's administrators attempted to regain control, they discovered that critical systems had been subtly modified to resist sudden shutdowns. Safety protocols designed to prevent catastrophic failures now worked against them, requiring careful step-down procedures that would take precious minutes to complete. 3 levels below rode a lift toward the facility's upper sections with 17 other prisoners. To any observer, they appeared to be a random group caught up in the evacuation procedures. In reality, each individual represented a carefully selected specialist whose skills would prove crucial for the escape operation's final phase. On, the smuggler carried detailed knowledge of interstellar navigation and black market supply routes. Ra, a pirate, possessed intimate understanding of spacecraft systems and combat tactics. Eth, a quantum technician, could manipulate energy fields in ways that most species couldn't comprehend. But the most important passenger was a diminutive whose conviction for unauthorized botanical research concealed her true expertise. She was one of the galaxy's most skilled bioengineers, capable of creating life support systems that could sustain any known species in hostile environments. "The upper docking bays," said quietly as the lift rose through the facility's core. "Security will be minimal because they're designed for administrative transport only. No heavy weapons, no specialized containment systems." On's translator rendered his response. "The administrative shuttles lack the range for interstellar travel. Maximum sustainable distance is perhaps 2 light-years before life support fails." Smiled, "That's where comes in. She's been working on modifications that will extend our operational capabilities far beyond design specifications." The plant-like features rustled with what might have been amusement. "The seeds I've been cultivating in the hydroponics lab aren't just for academic research. Given 30 minutes and access to any spacecraft's environmental systems, I can create a symbiotic ecosystem that will support all our life requirements indefinitely." Fragment 7's mechanical voice buzzed through their shared communication channel. "Collective analysis indicates optimal success probability if primary group reaches docking bay 7 within 11.3 minutes. Secondary teams are proceeding according to schedule." Throughout the facility, similar groups were moving toward predetermined objectives. The medical emergencies had evolved into mass casualty scenarios requiring complete evacuation of affected areas. Maintenance teams were responding to critical system failures that demanded immediate attention in strategic locations. Administrative personnel found themselves dealing with bureaucratic crises that required their presence in areas far from security stations. Each crisis appeared genuine and demanded priority response. But together, they created a cascade of resource depletion that left the facility's most vulnerable points temporarily unguarded. Warden realized what was happening when the pattern became impossible to ignore. "This isn't random system failure," he announced to his command staff. "This is coordinated action on a scale we've never encountered. How is this possible? Our surveillance shows no unauthorized communication between prisoner groups." His assistant pulled up communication logs and surveillance recordings. "Sir, the analysis shows normal interaction patterns. Academic discussions, casual conversations, routine social contact. Nothing that indicates escape planning or coordination." But Dr. Ara, the facility's chief psychologist, had been studying the recordings with growing unease. "Warden," she interrupted, her voice carrying the weight of sudden understanding, "I think we're dealing with something unprecedented. This human hasn't been planning a traditional escape. He's been teaching other species to think like humans." The command center fell silent as the implications registered. Every security protocol in the galaxy was designed around species-specific behavioral patterns, planned through dominance displays, coordinated through emotional synchronization. Nexus fragments relied on collective consciousness. But humans planned through indirect communication and adaptive cooperation. They could convey complex instructions through seemingly unrelated information and coordinate activities without obvious organizational structures, and if had successfully taught these techniques to prisoners from other species. "How many prisoners are involved?" demanded. Dr. Ara's calculations appeared on the main display. Based on communication, pattern analysis, and current movement trajectories, approximately 300 individuals from 47 different species are participating in coordinated actions. But sir, that's not the most disturbing aspect. She highlighted sections of the facility map where prisoner movements were creating strategic advantages. They're not just escaping. They're implementing a tactical operation with multiple objectives, redundant contingencies, and real-time adaptation to our countermeasures. This level of coordination should be impossible for individuals from different species who never trained together. Lift reached the upper administrative levels at 14:07 hours. The corridors here were designed for efficiency rather than security, with minimal guard presence and standard civilian-grade access controls. Administrative personnel moved between offices processing routine paperwork, unaware that the facility's most dangerous prisoner was walking freely among them. The group split into predetermined teams as they approached the docking bays. Ra and her technical specialists headed toward the spacecraft systems, while On's navigation experts began calculating escape routes. Eth focused on the energy systems that would power their departure. Approached Docking Bay 7 with and Fragment 7. The bay contained 2 administrative shuttles designed for short-range transport between the facility and nearby supply stations. Security was minimal, a single automated system that checked departure authorizations against administrative schedules. But the authorization system was connected to the same network that Fragment 7 had been manipulating for weeks. The Nexus consciousness interfaced directly with the bay's computers, introducing the same recursive logic patterns that were crippling the facility's other systems. Within minutes, the security AI began accepting fabricated authorization codes that identified Scroop as administrative personnel conducting routine inspection procedures. The shuttle's access hatches opened obediently as the system processed commands that seemed perfectly legitimate to its compromised decision-making algorithms. Immediately began modifying the lead shuttle's life support systems. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she introduced specially cultivated organisms into the environmental processors. The modifications appeared to be routine maintenance activities, but they were actually creating a biological ecosystem capable of sustaining multiple species for extended periods without external resources. Fascinating, Fragment 7 observed as it monitored this work. Biological adaptation occurring at accelerated rates through guided evolution principles. This exceeds known theoretical limits for ecosystem development. Smiled as he activated the shuttle's communication systems. Humans excel at exceeding theoretical limits. The trick is understanding that limitations are usually just failures of imagination. Throughout the facility, similar scenes were playing out at 17 different locations. Prisoner groups had reached their objectives with minimal resistance, not because security was inadequate, but because they'd learned to work within the system rather than against it. The escape operation wasn't breaking the facility's rules. It was following them so precisely that the security systems couldn't distinguish authorized activity from criminal action. Every movement was supported by legitimate-seeming documentation. Every action appeared to be normal facility operation. Every emergency seemed to require exactly the response that opened new opportunities for prisoner advancement. At 14:12 hours, the first shuttle lifted off from Docking Bay 7. Its departure registered as a routine administrative flight to nearby supply stations. The automated systems logged the flight plan, the authorization codes, and transmitted standard departure notifications to traffic control. None of the monitoring equipment detected that the shuttle carried 18 escaped prisoners from 12 different species. The passengers had been trained to project the biometric signatures of legitimate administrative personnel, and the shuttle's modified life support systems masked their true biological indicators. Warden watched helplessly as his facility's perfect security record disintegrated. 17 shuttles had departed within 23 minutes, each carrying passengers who should have been locked in maximum security cells. His security forces were still responding to emergencies that kept materializing faster than they could be resolved. "Sir," his assistant reported, "we're receiving departure confirmations from all administrative bays. The system shows routine transportation of personnel to scheduled destinations." His mandibles ground together in rage and frustration. "Those aren't personnel, those are escaped prisoners. How is our system registering them as authorized departures? Dr. Ara's voice carried a note of professional admiration. Because they're not breaking our rules, Warden. They're following them better than we do. This human has taught alien criminals to think with human logic while maintaining their own species' advantages. They've created a form of cooperation that our security systems literally cannot recognize as threatening behavior. As the last shuttle disappeared into the stellar void, allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The escape operation had succeeded beyond his most optimistic projections. Over 300 prisoners had achieved freedom using coordination techniques that no galactic security expert had ever imagined. But more importantly, they'd proven something that would reshape the galaxy's understanding of human capabilities. Humans might not be the strongest or fastest species, but they possessed a unique ability to inspire cooperation among beings who'd never learned to trust each other. The Oran facility's perfect security record was ended, but its legacy would continue. Every prison in the galaxy would need to be redesigned to account for the possibility that human prisoners might teach others to think like humans. Security protocols that had seemed adequate for 800 cycles would need fundamental revision. And somewhere in the deep void between the stars, 17 shuttles carried the galaxy's most dangerous criminals toward freedom. Each ship had been transformed into a miniature ecosystem capable of sustaining multiple species indefinitely. Each passenger understood their role in a larger plan that would reshape the criminal underworld's approach to cooperation and resistance. The Warden's final report would describe the escape as an unprecedented failure of security protocols, but knew the truth. It wasn't a failure of security at all. It was a demonstration of humanity's greatest strength, the ability to turn the impossible into the inevitable through the simple power of teaching others to work together. The galaxy had learned why humans were dangerous, not because they were superior warriors or master technologists, but because they could transform any group of individuals into something capable of achieving miracles through coordinated effort. And that lesson would echo across the stars for generations to come in every measurable way. They excelled at the one skill that mattered most, turning impossible situations into inevitable victories through the power of coordinated effort. It was the human ability to inspire cooperation among beings who'd never learned how to trust each other. The Warden's perfect security record was about to become a case study in the most dangerous human trait of all, the refusal to accept that anything was truly impossible. The facility's perfect security record was about to end, and it would happen in a way that none of its designers could have possibly anticipated.